Welcome everybody. Welcome to Ascend's Women in Leadership series featuring Soumya Srinagesh. She is the head of global messaging of exchange sales and VP at Twilio. Soumya has an impressive resume. So we're going to talk about her transition into management. It's a huge inflection point in all of our careers. So I'm excited to dive in today to talk about everything we wish we knew as a new manager. What I love the most about Soumya is she is not afraid to talk about her mistakes and have the hard conversations. This conversation is extra special for me because Soumya is one of my closest friends. We used to work together back at PayPal, and since then, she has been a sounding board for me as we've both been navigating our careers. So I know this conversation is going to be awesome because Soumya is just awesome and just an amazing human being. I'm Shivani. I'm the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer online leadership programs for women. What inspired me to start Ascend was I used to be in your shoes. As I was moving up to management, I learned the critical skills to lead and get buy-in by making a ton of mistakes. Some guidance, but primarily a lot of mistakes. So I wanted to create the leadership program that I wish I had access to when I was making that transition. Our mission at Ascend is to elevate more women into leadership. And we're doing it. We've had women from companies like Google, Slack, Peloton, Twilio come out of the program feeling more confident, being able to get buy-in even from difficult stakeholders, and moving up faster in their careers, including getting promoted. I really think we need to have more open and honest conversations around what it takes to move into management. And we can learn so much from senior leaders like Soumya, who've been there, done that, and have overcome these challenges. Today, we are going to chat for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to dive into any questions that you might have. So throughout our conversation, please add or upvote any questions in the bottom right of your webinar or Zoom screen. We want this to be fun and valuable for you. So if anything resonates with you, if you have had a similar experience, if you like something that you heard, throw it in the chat. And please change your chat setting right now to everyone instead of host and panelists so we can all see it. Soumya, thank you so much for joining. This is going to be so fun.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Same. All right. Okay, let's dive in. I want to hear more about you. Well, I mean, I know about you, but let's tell everybody else about you. And so, first, can you give us an overview of your career? Like, let's go beyond your LinkedIn profile. Tell us, what brought you here today?
Yeah, such a great question. Well, honestly, when people ask me about my journey, I always start with the personal. I grew up in the Bay Area. I have a pretty stereotypical Indian family. I'm the only person who is not a doctor, and therefore kind of a black sheep of my family. But I grew up in the Bay Area. I love to play golf for fun. That's something that my dad taught me when I was really little. And honestly, I was one of those people that as soon as I was old enough to leave the nest, I went to college as far away as I could get myself in the Northeast. I went to Wellesley and majored in math there. While I was in college, actually was like probably one of my first big moments of, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because I graduated in 2010, just as the mortgage crisis was wrapping up. And it was impossible to get a job or to know what was happening in the world. I was really fortunate to get a job on Wall Street. I worked for 2 years at Deutsche Bank in their investment banking department. Honestly, in the moment, I was like, banking seems like the kind of thing you should do if you're really smart and on top of it. And I knew it was a way I could be financially independent, which was really, really important to me then and still is. And so I did that job for 2 years. And actually, it was like a time where I learned that all that glitters isn't really gold. I think there was a lot of great stuff I learned as a banker, but I didn't ever feel like I fit in at an investment bank. And so after my 2-year program was over, I made my way into the world of tech, which is where I met you, at a job at PayPal, where I was on the biz ops and strategy team. And it's funny because PayPal now is like a darling of the public markets and absolutely crushing it on all fronts. But at the time that you and I were working there, we were kind of in a lull. Like we were kind of getting our butt kicked by Venmo and Square and Stripe, and PayPal wasn't doing any of the things that were really innovative around mobile technology. And you worked, of course, on a really big acquisition of Braintree, and I worked a lot on our corporate strategy around mobile wallets and stuff. And that's when I learned, like, actually I am really passionate about innovating in new products and technology, that there's so much happening around the API economy and developer ecosystem that's really powerful. And there is going to be like so much value created in this industry. And so after a couple of years at PayPal, I moved to a company called Good Data, which was making business intelligence software. And it was like maybe 120 person company at the time. And I was working really closely with the CFO on kind of anything that needed to be done, like company all hands presentations, fundraising, setting up lead generation dashboards, figuring out where our offices would be. And I learned so much about that business. And I learned a lot about operating in a small environment. But after a couple of years there, to be quite honest, like the business wasn't taking off. And like I kind of had to make this really hard choice that if I wanted to grow my career in the way that was like sort of aligned to my aspiration, I needed to be at a company with a little bit more momentum behind it. And that's when I joined Twilio in the winter of 2014. And Twilio at that time was building communications APIs that were in massively growing ecosystems like Uber and WhatsApp. And I joined leading the business ops team. And we'll talk more about my Twilio experience, but honestly, in the 7 years I was there, my last day was actually just Friday. I had a different job and a different manager almost every year. I learned so much. I had some of my most formative experiences in terms of building teams for the first time, failing big for the first time, winning big, and more. And so an amazing run. And I just passed my 7-year anniversary.
So exciting. Okay, let's get into some of those formative experiences. So let's talk more about moving into management. You know, you previously shared with me that when you first moved into management, only 1 out of 4 of your reports thought you were a good manager. Like that's gotta hurt. And I know you were talking about, because I also know like you deeply care about the people that you work with. And so I would imagine, you know, when you hear that, you're like, oh no, like what's going on? And then also you want to be a great performer. So how did you feel when you learned that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. You know, it's nice to be able to look back on it now and laugh, because in the moment it was truly, truly devastating. And I mean, you know, there's a lot of you on the chat, and I'm sure the fact that you took an hour out of your day to just learn and work on yourself shows that you're probably not used to getting like a 25% success rate on anything. And that was like, honestly, it was like a punch in the gut when I saw that number. And actually I got called, my boss, who was CEO of our company, called me into his office and was like, this is really bad. And like read me a bunch of basically the comments that my team had put that I had not ever dreamed would be like words that were written about me and how I was at work. And how that felt was like, honestly, first of all, I was completely blindsided. And I think a lot of people here probably can like imagine how that feels, where you feel like you're actually like doing okay at something, and then like someone shines a mirror on an element of it and you're just like totally blindsided by how you're perceived. And so that was something that was like a huge, it was just like a really emotional experience, to be quite honest. And then I think the other thing about it for me was like, it was really an eye-opener that what kind of gets you here isn't going to get you there. What got me promoted to be like the head of the biz ops team, and why people trusted me to hire and manage more people, is because like I produced great work and great analysis, and I knew the business and like worked super hard, like, and all of those kind of things. And like being a manager and motivating other people, it's not something that purely just putting in more hours is going to help, or being the smartest person is going to help, or doing great analysis yourself is going to help you at that. And so I think what was like just like the other kind of eye opener for me is like all of the like core skills that I was leaning on, that I was kind of like doubling down on even as a manager, were actually like potentially the things that were holding me back. And that left me in a place of like, you know, you asked how I felt, and I felt like really lost, because I was like, wow, like all the things that I'm used to doing that have helped me succeed are like not the things that are helping me succeed, and may actually be like hurting me as a leader. And so that's how I felt in the moment. And that's a little bit about what happened.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to just first, just say thank you, because you don't have to share that. And I know it's, clearly it was a hard situation, something that we can really benefit from, because people don't talk about this part of the experience. Like in our careers, we primarily just hear like, I got promoted and this happened and this happened, but this is real. This happens. We get, like, I know I've gotten negative feedback from my teams before, or, we all have issues. So like, as we're navigating our career. So first of all, I just want to say big thank you for just being so open and honest.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
And, one thing you were just talking about, like, I love, you're like, what got you here won't get you there. Cause you're so right. Like when you're an IC, what makes you successful as an IC individual contributor is different than what makes you successful as a people manager. So I'm curious, what did you wish you knew when you had moved from the individual contributor role to the manager role?
That's such a great question. I think what I wish I knew and what I wish I did differently a little bit. Number one is like, I think I was at that time, like really focused on outputs, and not on maybe the inputs or the how of getting to the right answer. So as an example, like, maybe we needed to do slides for the board, and I would just start from a place of like, well, here's my template from last time, please fill it out with refresh numbers and send it back to me. And then someone would send it to me, and what would be like the words in my head were like, what is George going to think? Our CFO, what is, our CFO going to think? What are these people going to think? And then just kind of like whip up the work based on like what I thought our leaders would think and wanted to see, and like how I would do things. And it's funny because actually that was how I was managed in some of those early jobs I talked about not liking it, like at Deutsche Bank. And I was kind of just doing that again. And I was just so laser focused on like what I thought a perfect work output would look like, that I really didn't focus at all on like a collaborative or shared creative process to get there. And I wish I had like taken a breath and really put the outputs aside and refocused on like, like spending the right time on a process, bringing my team along so that I could learn, they could learn, we could come up with answers together. And honestly, when you're able to do that, what I've learned over time is like the output you don't have to worry about. Those of you who are on the call who know me know I'm like really into going to the gym. And it's like one of those things in management where if you just focus on like maybe what the scale says at the end of the day, but you haven't like gone to the gym every day, like you're never going to get the output you want. And so that's something that I wish I had done differently from the beginning. I think the other thing that like I've really changed over time is just the amount that I trust other people, and the amount that I'm actually have been able to like be humble to realize like my answer is not really always the right answer or best answer or only answer. And so like once I was able to divorce myself that like it was kind of my way was the best way, I was able to actually like start to really improve and transform my work, because so many other people were contributing ideas that frankly like were better than mine, and or different than mine, or just a different approach. So I think those are two things that I wish I would have done really differently from the beginning.
I love that. And I want to talk more about this experience. I can see it's really resonating with people in the chat. How did you learn how to be a great leader? So I know initially it sounds like you were, copying what you would experience, like when people managed you. And that's such a natural transition point. I do the same thing. So many of us just mimic our previous managers. So how did you figure out what it does take to be a good leader? And actually, even before answering that, like, what does being a good leader mean to you? And then answering, like, how did you learn to be a good leader?
That's such a great question. So what does a good leader mean to me? When I think about, especially in like the professional realm, the leaders that have motivated me the most and have helped me really unlock like my best performance and potential, there's a few things that really resonate for me. And one is like, I think trust. And I think it's a word that like comes up a lot in forums like this and books, is how to build and, create trust with your teammates. But it's something that, especially as I've gotten older, I value more and more. And to me, what trust really means is kind of being accountable, doing what you say you're going to do. Trust means having your outer behaviors match your inside. So like, to me, a huge red flag on trust is gossiping or speaking behind people's backs or having a piece of feedback that you're not going to openly share. trust is like knowing that people are going to be with you in the good times and the bad times, and especially the bad times, knowing you can go to people with problems and they're going to be on your side to solve it. So for me, like trust is something that I've seen my best leaders really demonstrate, and it can manifest in a few specific ways. Like actually, George, who I talk a lot about, he was the CEO of Twilio. He'll always make time to meet with anyone on his team, down to like the front line of his, multi-thousand person organization, even if you have an issue or a topic that is like well below his pay grade. And I think that's like an example of something that really adds to an environment of trust, because that there's an open door policy to speak to someone who, is ultimately accountable for the team's results. My latest leader, Lauren, is someone who I think has like massive amount of trust, because she's actually radically transparent about people decisions, about business decisions. So for me, trust is something that I think is critical for great leaders. I think for me, the second thing is consistency. And so I think that kind of comes back to like holding a really consistent bar across the team, and being like kind of a source of stability and focus, especially because many of us are working in startup environments that are pretty like crazy and up and down in a lot of ways. And I think people want to come to their leaders and like know that, hey, you're going to listen, you're going to bring constructive solutions, you're going to help find an answer, not like, oh, because you're stressed or the leaders are stressed or something crazy is happening, this person's actually a source of like volatility and intensity. And so being that source of stability is something that I've really valued from like my craziest leaders, like where when you're really in the eye of the hurricane, they're going to be like a calming force that's going to help you be really rational about your path forward. Another thing that I really value, I would say, in like my leaders is just really like knowing the business and like competence, and being able to like look at the data, put together org designs and structures that matter, hold people accountable to consistent sets of metrics. And like, I think there's a part of leadership that's about the people stuff that I just talked about before, but I think a huge part of leadership is like setting a really good business strategy and following through on it. And that's been one of the things that I've been able to lean on quite a bit over the years.
Yeah, I love all those. And so how did you learn how to do all that? Okay, so actually, wait, before you do that, like give us the end result. Like right now there's this cliffhanger. Okay, so you got that really bad review. 25% of your reporters thought you were a good manager. 75% thought you weren't. How did you, like, what was the end result and how did you get there?
Yeah, such a great question. So the end result, now I'm our VP of messaging exchange. I lead, large global organization of sales teams. I have senior, directors and directors reporting to me. And I get really high engagement scores, over 95% now. And my team will say things like, Soumya really listens. Soumya really knows the business. We really trust Soumya. Soumya is an inspiring leader, and so it's such a game changer. Honestly, there's a part of me when these scores come out that still has a little bit of like, I don't know, anxiety. Like I'm like waiting for Culture Amp to load. I'm like, oh God, I hope it's not 25% again. But thankfully in the last 5 years, I have not been back at that F- grade as manager.
Yeah, you're crushing it now.
Thank you. So I guess your question was like, what helped me get here? So honestly, like I would say step one for me, and this may not be like everyone's journey, but just taking like a massive dose of humble pie, like that is a very humbling experience to get a bad score like that. And realize people you were working with every day didn't think you were an effective manager. And what I'm really grateful for in retrospect of this happening is like, it put a total mirror up to myself about learning to do things a different way and driving change. And what I did in that like moment, like 1 week after getting those scores, is I like went on a walk with everyone on my team. And I was like, hey, just to be really open with you, like I was completely blindsided by this, but obviously like, to not to put too fine a point on it, but you clearly like feel a certain way about my management style because you put it in this survey, and like I didn't know about it, and like I'm really committed to like changing but I need some better information to like change. And I want to hear what you really think. And honestly, like humbling myself, and like, I'm not even gonna lie, like some of those conversations I even cried a little bit, is like people just like an outpouring came out. It's like, you know, you don't really listen. Like when you're stressed, it percolates down to the team when other people are stressed, you know. And like what I kind of learned out of it is people just felt like I was too much in that moment of like kind of the taskmaster, and it was sort of a no-win situation because like doing something up to my bar was just kind of like, okay, it's up to Soumya's bar, and then there was just like plenty of room to fail underneath that. And so what I kind of learned was like, okay, I need to like work on a couple things that will really transform like how I lead and manage. And one is like giving people much more autonomy and ownership over how they work and what their output looks like, and going from there. And so I really like step back from, you know, here's your task and here's my template and here's exactly the steps I want to do it, and started much more of like, hey, like X is the problem, like what do you think we should do? Let someone give you the answer. Why do you think we should do it that way? Okay, is there any other way we could do it? And just ask a lot more questions that bring someone into the process and give them more ownership of the work. I think the second thing that I started doing as like very much a part of my daily routine and practice is finding in every interaction something to appreciate and recognize that's authentic, whether it's a result, an effort, a behavior, an intention on someone else's part. Just the fact that they spent time with you in a meeting or prep for something, and create an energy around me of like positivity and rewards that really make people feel seen and recognized for the great work that they're doing. It actually pushed me to then realize like, if I'm constantly looking for things to recognize, like I'm actually learning quite a bit. And I'm finding a lot of like great progress within the business to kind of double down on. So I think for me, creating an environment around me of like positive recognition and rewards, there's really, it's funny, I read this in a book about training my dog, but I think it's totally true about everything as too much reward for like something that's good. So I think that was like kind of the second thing that I really learned. And then the third is like constantly asking for feedback. Whether it's these surveys, whether it's in one-on-ones, etc. I just listen, you know, a lot more. And I think that my team like genuinely understands and feels like that if I ask for feedback, I really mean it. And that I'm actually going to do something with it. I asked recently, like a gentleman on my team, Mark, who's in our London office, like actually our London leader is like probably has like a cult like following. He's one of the most like magical loved leaders, I think, at Twilio. And I was kind of asking the person who's on my team in London, like, why do you think this person is like so loved? And like, what do you think I could do differently to be more like that? And he kind of came back to me with like really interesting feedback. He was like, you know, everyone knows you like know the answer. And when we come to you and we're like outlining a problem and you're just like, oh, here's the answer. It's like, that actually is not what we want. We just kind of want you to be in the passenger seat and like on the team and like know that it's not your job to like jump in with an answer. And I was like, wow, like very insightful feedback. And it was something I could totally run with. And so building that into like my weekly and daily ritual of how I'm interacting with everyone across my organization has been something that I think has like engendered a spirit of like everyone's improving together, and you know a lot more about how people are perceiving you.
I love that. Oh, all that is so good. So how did you learn all of this? Like, did you get coaching? What was it, kind of like trial by error, and you identifying like, and then does feedback help you identify where to improve?
Great question. Honestly, I'd say all of the above. And I do think so. In I guess right around the time of like COVID starting. So I guess 2020, I started working with an executive coach. Her name's Raj Kumari. That completely changed my approach to work and my ability to like really understand myself. And she actually specializes in kind of like epigenetic analysis. And I actually spent a lot of time digging into her, like digging in with her about how like my childhood in like sort of a first generation Indian family really has shaped my leadership style. And like I grew up in the kind of family where it was just like, get A's, it's not a choice. Like, oh, you don't like X, like put up with it because you have to do it to get to this destination. And it really like shaped a lot of how I pushed myself through the first, 5+ years of my career. And it ultimately was like my starting point for how I was managing my team was just like kind of like how you feel sort of is a luxury and like doesn't really matter. And like what you do is like what really counts. She really shined a mirror against like how I was looking at things like that and totally changed how I was able to unlock better and different performance at work. And the fact that she was someone who like didn't really work with me and like wasn't really in the business, and also wasn't like connected in any like overt way to like what jobs I had or whether I was getting promoted or anything, I think actually created a really like safe space for me to talk about all this stuff, whether it was personal or professional, because I really had like zero, I don't know, vested feeling about like what she thought of me. And so I think that was like hugely impactful. And like I'm a huge believer. I brought her in, I brought others, and I've been an advocate for Ascend at Twilio.
Your sound cut out right there.
Oh, sorry. I was saying having a neutral third party coach who's really well versed in leadership and team dynamics and can help bring different tools to your kind of tool belt is really, really important to me.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I totally agree with that. And I've seen it. So first, I mean, like, yes, 100%. You've been such a great supporter of bringing Ascend into Twilio, and it's been amazing working with Twilians. And what I've seen is, in Ascend, like, there's been so much value. People really appreciate being able to be with like colleagues, but also not colleagues. So it becomes a safe space, judgment free. You can share whatever. You don't have to worry about offending your colleagues. So agreed on. I think that's been also what I've done, kind of opportunities like that to help me grow. That's been so important, where I don't have to think about, am I going to offend anyone? I can just like share openly, like, here's what's holding me back. And that's really helped my growth. One thing you were talking about right now, and a question I see in the chat, how do you weigh respecting the process of coming up with answers as a team versus needing to move fast and make sure that you have a good output quickly?
That's a great question. So for me, I kind of separate two things. One is like, I want to work in a collaborative fashion where people's input is considered. Ultimately, as the leader, I have to make decisions. And I think that a lot of times, like, people conflate a consensus oriented decision making world with a collaborative, more like input driven world. So for me, frankly, like, I don't think it's possible to make really good business decisions without holistic input from stakeholders who are impacted by the decision or accountable for making it happen or from your team. So for me, like, even if you have to move quickly, getting input is like a critical part of the process. I think from there, you need to use your input and the data you collect to make a decision. And I think having a clear decision owner, and ultimately as the manager, being accountable for your decision, even if it's unpopular or not accepted by everyone, is kind of part of like what comes with that responsibility. So for me, it's about collecting input, making a decision, and then really explaining my decision. And I have people who like don't agree with my decisions all the time, and I have to go back to them and say, hey, this is my decision. I'm going to ask you to like commit to this, even if you disagree. I'm going to ask you to try this for 6 months. And if at the end of 6 months it's not working, we can revisit it, or 30 days or whatever is appropriate. And so that allows me to like kind of always be able to do some amount of like input driven collaboration, but still make a decision and move at an appropriate speed for the business.
I love that. Is there certain, how you're saying like you'll share the decision and you explain like why you're making it? Something we talk a lot about in it's not one of the topics, is like getting buy-in. And what do you do? And always kind of share, and always sharing the rationale of like, why are you approaching something? So I'm curious, like, are there strategies or phrases or tips that you have for when you are presenting a decision to a party, to your team, where you know that they're not going to agree with it? And how do you frame it in a way, even if you're like, okay, this is it, we just got to get on board and let's just move forward with it?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And honestly, I had like kind of a tough example of this just last week because we were making some decisions about moving people around in our team, and it wasn't agreed to by everyone. And ultimately, where I started was like, hey, like I had three kind of stakeholders involved, and I asked them all to like basically bring like their data and their recommendation. And we looked at like the data and the recommendation, and there was one like kind of clear thing that like, you know, we needed to do basically based on what all of that said. But one person was still completely not on board with it. And it was like obvious in the moment at the end of the meeting that they were kind of like leaving, not happy with the decision. And actually they ended up like following up with me on email to like kind of plead their case like as another time, even though I had made a decision in the meeting. And ultimately I just had to respond saying like, hey, like, first of all, I hear you. I understand why you're like not happy with this decision because it's going to cause problems for you in your world. Like what we can do to address those problems is like, you know, have this person transition slowly or in 6 months and share some responsibilities. So like you'll have more breathing room and time to figure it out. I think like what the lesson is from that piece of it is like hearing and seeing what someone's like unmet need is or concern is, which may not be the thing they're explicitly telling you, is kind of the first step of like getting someone to be on board with a difficult decision. You know, someone might like kind of actually have, you know, in this case, like the complaint that, hey, this person's not going to be good at this role. But like underneath it was like, oh, decisions are being made, you know, on my team while I'm not in the office, or decisions are being made about my world that are going to make my life more challenging and I'm not going to get resources to fill it. So like unpacking what someone's resistance is to an idea, and it might not be what they actually say in the room or in the meeting, is really important. And even if like you don't have a solution, acknowledging that you know how difficult it's going to be and actually being committed to finding a way to move forward, I think is an important way to like level set when you're in that situation. I think the second thing is then just like explaining the trade-off. You know, hey, I looked at the data, I looked at the information, this is where I landed and here's why, is kind of the second piece, and just being really clear with people about what that is. I tend to have a like format of reviewing things in groups, in one-on-ones, and in writing in a really consistent way so that things are very clear, and everyone hears the same message from me. Which, going back to the things about trust and accountability and consistency are really important. You know, I'm not going to go to one report and kind of spin it a certain way and then go to another report and spin it another way so that everyone kind of leaves feeling like they're the winner, and just explaining the facts, you know. And then the last thing is like, I always ask people like, can you commit to this? And like, I wait to hear them say yes or no, and like leave it open for them to be really honest. So I know where I stand with people and I know what's going on. And for me, that's kind of like my 3-step approach to sort of getting buy-in and clarity with my team about decisions. And honestly, most decisions, like not everyone agrees to. So, and that's the reality.
Yeah, that's a great call out. You're not going to get everybody on board, or you can get them on board, but they might not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, like it's a complicated world with a lot of different right ways to do things, you know. And so I think expecting or waiting for everyone to be on board, honestly, some of like the weaker leaders I've worked with have that mindset, and I think it stalls progress because there's just no way for everyone to be on board. You kind of have to prioritize like how am I going to run the business? Who's most accountable for getting things done that I need to weigh their sort of input and feedback the most? And then like, you know, how do I bring everyone else along? And what I found is over time, like, you know, things kind of even out in a sense, in the sense that, you know, not everyone agrees with every decision, but people agree with enough decisions to feel like the direction of the team and the company is right.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one thing that really stuck out to me right now, as you were talking about, you know, how do you communicate your ideas when you know someone might be pushing back, is you were talking about like unpack their underlying assumptions and motivations. Funny enough, I just posted about this today too on the same topic with similar to what you're saying. So we're like so on the same page here, but I want to like dig into more about your perspective, because I think this is such a thing that like so often I find we come in with our own assumptions we don't spend the time unpacking it. We're just like, why are they being so difficult? Like, why aren't they understanding it? They just don't get it. And like you pointed out, there's actually, don't take it at surface level, understand what they're saying is different than probably what their actual concerns are. At the same time, it takes a lot of patience to be able to unpack that. So what are some strategies that you use to unpack, like, hey, let me just figure out, like, what are you actually pushing back on?
Such a great question. It brings to mind a story. I worked with this amazing leader, Allison, at Twilio. And when I was just starting my current team, messaging exchange sales, I forget what, I was having a one-on-one or something with her. And I was like, what do you think motivates my team? And she went through the like 6 or 7 people I had on my team. And she was like, this person just wants like the most efficient outcome. This person just cares about their commissions checks. This person just cares about, and she was able to actually just, and as she went through them, I was like, that is totally spot on, and she was able to actually distill like the core ambitions of a bunch of people on my team. Like that was like 75% accurate in just a couple words. And I think for me, like the baseline is really knowing the individuals that I'm working with the closest and like what kind of fundamentally motivates them, because I don't think it's that people are applying a radically different like problem solving set to every decision or every day or every project they're working on, but people are just motivated by different things. I have leaders who like ultimately, care about just like process efficiency. I have people who care a lot about winning big deals. I have people who care a lot about making their team happy, and they're always going to defend their team. And so I think for me, it starts from really like, in your mind as a manager, you should have a sense of what are the top 1 to 2 things that just motivate the individuals on your team. And that is going to ultimately be the source of resistance or momentum for a lot of what they do. And I think that's kind of like the core thing that helps you figure it out. For me, like I have people who just have an unmet need for appreciation or an unmet need for knowing they have the best answer. And if you just say, hey, like X person, I know your data says X and it's really makes sense and you have the most rational answer, but I'm not going to be able to accommodate that. And here's why. Like they're going to feel like you actually see and hear them and that their concern is kind of raised. And a lot of times I think it comes down to similar themes for each person.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. Last question from you for you from the chat. How do you manage different types of personalities on your team? For example, how do you manage novices versus experts, or dependents versus independents, under versus overperformers? And I think this ties in really nicely right now with what you're talking about, like understanding what motivates people. So, on a similar line, like these different personalities, different way people approach things. How do you manage these different personalities?
Yeah, such a great question. I think one of the things that's helped me actually as a leader is I've stopped really thinking about myself as managing my team. I don't think I can manage them, or it sounds like very constraining when you use the word managing. I think about it as like, how do I create an environment where those different personalities can really thrive and do their best work? Which is really different than the word managing. I think it's actually about like letting go of a lot of control and removing yourself in a lot of ways from the equation. For me, leading in that way has come down to a couple things. One is like having a pretty intellectually honest point of view that my team agrees with about where people are strong and where people need development. And in areas where someone is really strong and has a lot of momentum, my approach is to throw really big challenges at them and see how far they can push it, and know that I have enough visibility in terms of outputs to throw in a lifeline or ask questions if something is not going on track, but also know that they probably actually, as a strong swimmer, they might know if they're running out of breath or need a lifeline, and they'll come and ask me for help. And it's really like I have a couple people on my team, like this gentleman I'm talking about who leads our London team. He's like incredible in front of customers, and I would never think to like go look at his gong recordings to like see if he's doing a good job in customer calls or not, or like join a customer call if he didn't ask me because I need to be there, because like I just know he's like incredible at that and he thrives at that, and like I'm all about him going and doing that. Conversely, like I have people on my team who maybe like data is not like a strong source of like how they lead, and so what I'll do in like that kind of situation is like, first of all, like come with like appreciation for effort and work they're doing that's good, etc. in that space to kind of like recognize what's going well, but also have really open conversations about where the bar is and how we can get there together, and like agree to how we are going to work together on producing, as an example, better data, or as an example, a more structured lead gen list or whatever it is, so that we're kind of on the same page about doing that. I think the other piece of it in terms of personality that's less about maybe skills is more about, you know, how do you manage like different styles? Maybe some people are more intense. Maybe some people have behaviors that detract from like cohesive team dynamics. For me, what's really important in those scenarios, particularly, is to pause and really ask people, how are they helping our team when they are interrupting? How are they helping our team be more successful when they don't show up to a meeting with data that they need? How are they helping our team be successful when they gossip about a reorg with a third party? And I think as a leader, those are really tough conversations to have. But it's something I've learned a lot from my coaches. Like, you kind of need to ask people, like, what's the value they're adding when they're allowing their personality or when they're allowing their behaviors to kind of like detract from the team dynamic. And that's a big part of like the toolkit I've had to employ, is I've had more and more different personalities on our team. And I'm trying to create an environment where everyone is sort of included and able to contribute at their best level.
I love that. And that was so detailed. So thank you for addressing like how different people might operate and how to tackle
Yeah.
that. This has been so good. So
if you ask someone what's the value they're adding when they interrupt you in a team meeting, I guarantee you they will not interrupt you again.
That's yeah, I can imagine just being like, I'll be quiet now.
Yeah. No value. That's what I'm adding.
Yeah, I love that. So. There's so many good takeaways. It's really resonating with people in the chat. So for all of you listening in, throw in the chat, what's one takeaway or one thing that you want to remember from our conversation today? I mean, here we covered so much around how do you inspire people? How do you learn how to be a good leader? What does being a good leader look like? Understanding that transition from individual contributor to manager, knowing like what got you here isn't going to get you there. So throw in the chat, what's one takeaway that you want to think about? What value are you adding? Yes. How are you helping the team when you do this? Being a good listener, acting on feedback, the difference between managing versus letting go and letting your team thrive. When is Soumya coming back to talk more with us? Soumya, you're a hit. The power of vulnerability. This is so good. Yes, be humble and vulnerable, but also not afraid to have tough conversations. I think here, you know, how you're being vulnerable, and I want to just like, you know, call us out for the group, is that makes us love you more as a leader. And I think so often when we're so afraid to talk about our mistakes because we're like, what will people think of us? But actually hearing you talk about this mistake and kind of like inflection point that you had makes us admire you even more. So thank you for like all this great advice you're sharing, but also just setting such a good role model for the power of vulnerability and how it truly does help us be a better leader. It's so good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thanks everyone who joined. I'm honestly really overwhelmed and candidly quite shocked by the response that we've had, and really, really grateful that I got to spend this time with you.
Yeah, same here. This is so fun. Big thank you to everybody for joining us. You know, if you really enjoyed today's conversation and you want to develop the skills that Soumya has been talking about, how do you inspire people? How do you move into management with a smoother transition, develop the skills? And you want to do it with a like-minded community of women in the safe space, no judgment, then I'd love for you to come join us in the Ascend's Leadership Program for Women. Erin is dropping the link in the chat to join our waitlist for our upcoming program. So if you're interested, you'll get to learn with a group of women from top companies. It's just a high caliber, low ego group. It's amazing. So if you're interested, add your name to the waitlist. So when we open enrollment, we'll reach out. We will send out the recording for this conversation. This was so, so good. Soumya, thank you again from the bottom of my heart for just opening up and for all your great advice. You're a powerhouse, a legend. I'm so excited we get to learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Happy holidays.